Now that you've found UBN Radio and discovered our quality talk shows, it's time to spread the word to friends, family, and the universe. 24 hours of music and talk. Radio without limits. That's why people keep coming back for more. That's ubnradio.com.
Welcome to Richard Listens. I am your host, Peter Sobey, and we have a little feedback on my phone after I told everyone, make sure you turn off your cell phones. So, I present to you, as we get this feedback, to our very own Richard Olberger. And that's you, Richard.
Thank you.
Boy, I'm so proud to. Our guest today is probably thinking like, okay, what have I got myself into? These guys are a couple of clowns.
Well, you were just doing a little like the Who experiments.
Yeah, exactly.
Feedback, like let's get the guitar close to the amp, see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. And so, before I even go any further, Richard, go ahead and welcome our guest to this show because we're in it.
Thank you. We are in it. We are here. This is a very exciting moment for me. It's like yesterday that somebody handed me, after I got off a plane from Kansas City, a book written by the Paul then Shirley, and where I got to learn a little bit about our guest's experience, who's an author, a public speaker, and former member of the National Basketball Association, and a member of the Flying Cyclones, I believe.
The Flying Cyclones. They were just the regular Cyclones.
Cyclone. So without further ado, our special guest tonight, very humbled to introduce Mr. Paul Shirley.
All right, welcome to the show, Paul.
Thanks, guys. Thanks.
So yes,
Flying Hoibergs, right?
The Flying Hoibergs. I mentioned the Who. That made me think about. Did you see Eddie Vedder doing?
I did. Yeah, I mean
Take Me Out to the Ball Game?
That was a very big moment, and I was really glad that he kind of took the time to give a shout out to David Ross.
Yeah, that was
he dedicated
amazing.
it to David Ross.
Right.
It was really amazing, and I guess since I didn't do a real proper beginning of the show because of my own mess up, in honor of Halloween today and in honor of my Chicago Cubs, I am dressed as Joe Madden.
That's right.
With the hat, you can't see it. The back of my shirt says Madden. I've got the black rim glasses, and I dyed my beard gray. Wink, wink. So I could look, so I could kind of look like Joe Madden. Oh yeah, look at that, Jarvis, the amazing Jarvis.
See
the comparison. Side by side. Like, there's Joe Madden, and then you go back to me. Like, what?
Wow.
Yeah, I could.
How is Joe Madden hosting the Richard Listens show?
That's amazing.
They had a day off.
He's got to be in Cleveland tomorrow night. So.
Hopefully ready to bust out the W.
Are you okay with Eddie Vedder claiming the Cubs? Because he's not. Is he really a Chicago guy? He grew up in San Diego.
I know, that's the thing. He's a San Diego guy. But you know what? It's almost why I love him even more. That he's so diehard. But he wasn't like. I mean, maybe he was raised in a household of Cubs fans. I don't know. But for me, my parents, their love of the Cubs grew on me. And But to see someone from San Diego via Seattle be such a huge Chicago Cubs fan, just amazing. I love it.
Mariners fans have to be sad, though, right?
Yes, exactly.
And Padres fans. It's been a long time.
And
the Cubs, everybody, that's the thing about the Cubs. Everybody already loves the Cubs.
Right.
You don't need more people on your side.
That's what makes it hard, this World Series, because even though the Cubs have a lot of fans everywhere, I think there's a lot of people that also say, like, yeah, but, everyone loves the Cubs. So it's like they kind of don't care or something. It's a real double-edged sword,
It's such a great story. I mean, I'm a Mets fan. I was very surprised and happy when we defeated your Cubs, sadly, last year.
Yes.
But I have to say, part of baseball folklore, whatever day that Wrigley turned on the lights, I mean, the ivy on the wall. I mean, it's just such a historic part of baseball and Americana. So it's great.
We've got a real triad of former lovable losers whose teams have succeeded of late, because I'm a Royals fan.
Right.
That's right.
I think 3 years ago, if you'd said Mets, Royals, Cubs, those teams will be in World Series in the next 3 years, we've been, no, that's impossible.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
And now here we are. Look at us, guys, on top of the world. We've done it.
Yep. Yeah, you
because
guys
of us.
You guys had the World Series last year, Mets, Royals, and I've got it with the Cubs this year. So, yeah, it's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So, but enough about the Cubs, even though I could talk about the Cubs all night. That's for certain. I do want to mention that, as a lot of people know, we are on Facebook Live right now. And you can see us on Facebook Live at facebook.com/RichardListens. And if you check in or leave a comment, I'm kind of, as you saw from the beginning of the show, I am looking at Facebook Live during the show, and I might just mention you or your comment or that you've checked in, like, hey, I see my friend from Chicago, Chris Malcolm, has checked in. Old high school friend. That's pretty exciting. He's
Hey,
a big
Chris.
sports guy. So, yeah, and so...
and we like to see your questions, too. We'll try and incorporate them, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. If you have a question, put it in a comment on Facebook Live, and we might just bring up your question, and we'll give you credit. So, also, a little bit later in the show, we'll be doing our feature called Richard Listens List of 3, which is usually a list of 3, sometimes 4 related topics that we'll kind of go into. And, you know, we are a sports psychology-centric show, although sometimes we veer off into like nutrition or children in sports. But that's what makes today's show with Paul really, really great and special. And I'm so excited about this, as I'm sure you are, Richard. And I'm sure that Paul's building some excitement. Is that, you know...
He'd better be, or we're going to make him do push-ups.
Ooh, okay. I think there's some people out there that might like to see that. But anyway,
22-day push-up challenge going around. Somebody nominate Paul Shirley.
yes. But what's so great about having someone like Paul Shirley on our show is he is a bona fide, honest-to-goodness, former professional basketball player. Holy cannoli. I mean, that's crazy. And so a lot of times we've talked about on the show already about, like, athletes' lives after sports. And we're sitting here with one that's going to be someone who's had amazing, amazing success since his NBA career. I mean, motivational speaker, published author, writing group, teacher, and the list probably, does the list go on, Paul?
I think that's enough. That sounds like plenty.
That is a lot. And to start with, I would really like to talk about your book for a while.
Okay.
And it's kind of a long name, which, Can I Keep My Jersey?
Yeah. Too long, you think?
No, I was thinking there's also a subtitle,
The
right?
subtitle
Can I keep
is awful.
It's
Like,
a subtitle. So
it's
it's
too
Can I
much.
Keep My Jersey?
I can't even tell you the subtitle because I had nothing to do with the subtitle, as you can imagine.
It's
in
kinda
book
like
publishing.
my travels and travails
It's-
as a vagabond.
Yeah, it's something like 4 years, 5 countries, 13 teams in the life of a basketball vagabond. Or something.
Okay,
But
there you
again,
go.
I had very little to do with the subtitle of the book, and actually I had to fight for the title really hard,
Wow.
which was weird because everybody I say that title to is like, that's a great title.
Yeah.
But Random House was pretty obstinate about it at various points.
Wow, and to me it does seem like a great title because, I mean, it kind of says it all, doesn't it?
It does. I think what I've always run into is that people want to focus on the NBA part because that they think is what sells people on whatever, my story or my life. My book, of course, is about the whole arc, right, of being overseas, of the minor leagues, and that's probably where the more interesting stories come from anyway.
Yeah.
But I think when they bought the book, I was at the time in the NBA. They wanted it more focused on the excitement or the pageantry of this guy's in the NBA. I think they wanted to call it A View from the End of the Bench because they thought that most of the stories would come from the NBA experience. When in fact, the NBA is very boring. Like it's sterile, and the guys are such professionals, and they're such little corporations that there really aren't the mistakes and the screw-ups, which are, as we all know, the things that lead to good stories.
Yeah. I don't know. Should I spoil some of the book? I don't know.
Maybe, but first, do me a favor, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I know there's a lot of people out there that really want a good look at your face,
Mm-hmm.
cheat yourself to your right. Like you're kind of facing me.
Oh, okay.
Just with the way the camera set up. Oh, yeah. Now they got a good look at you. That's awesome.
A good look. It's weird. I'm clean shaven, and I'm never this way. I had a bad mustache for Halloween, so I had shaved last night.
Oh, that's funny. Because, you know, like I'm
confusing, yeah.
growing my beard to grow a bad mustache.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I do every year for like Halloween.
Okay.
I was going to, if the Cubs lost last night, I was going to come today as as Ditka because I got the Ditka sweater. I was going to get
You're
the
gonna move on?
mustache. Yeah.
Plus the Bears are on Monday Night Football.
And they're on Monday Night Football, and they were winning 20-3 in the
What?
fourth quarter
Mm-hmm.
against the vaunted Minnesota Vikings.
What?
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
I can't
Yeah,
believe what I'm
it-
hearing. I
yeah,
can't even
it's
check
crazy.
this right now to verify. I can't.
just turn this into a Chicago sports
I know, right?
podcast.
I don't know how I brought it. Oh, well, that I was gonna come as Ditka tonight with my mustache,
Mm-hmm.
but the Cubs won, so I had to represent Joe Madden and keep my Joe Madden beard. And welcome Michelle Strabala, another friend of mine from high school. It's so weird. Like
He's
the last
winning
few
2-0,
weeks.
2-0-0
Yeah,
right
the
now.
last few weeks, I got nobody. Tonight, 2 so far. But yes, now people have a good look at your clean-shaven face.
Mhm.
Paul, thank you. And let's take it back to you, Richard. Let's have a couple of those book spoilers.
Yeah, there's so many. I mean,
We should first set it up, I think, by
Okay.
saying how you got my book, which is
well,
Oh,
this
yeah.
is great.
To the-
This is great. And let's give a shout out to Aaron Coffey and
Mhm.
Batsheva, who the timing in sports and in life is often so fabulous. And I'm thankful that Batsheva handed me Paul's book right after my return trip from Kansas City.
right
From my
semi hometown.
Exactly.
Enough, yeah.
So I'm sure that probably piqued Paul's interest, and it was right when I was getting coming off a tryout and coming through this experience of did I fit in, all these new anxieties, and this isn't my livelihood as it was for you, but it certainly raised all these things where all of a sudden some of the thoughts that you're verbalizing in the book of like, right, are they really considering me in this tryout? Is it worth it to give up my one day off
Right.
after traveling on a bus?
Right.
Like when you really, if it's Sioux City, I believe, where you play, I mean, really, pointing out how sometimes, right, can you really keep your eye on getting that shot back in the NBA, or do you just need a day of rest
Right.
for your own sanity?
Right.
And who's there to kind of help you weigh those options in that moment when you're tired or you're hurt?
Yeah, no, I think I'm excited to get to talk to you guys today because there were so many things I think that went unsaid during my career about the psychology of being a professional athlete, and it's only been afterward that I've been able to unpack what some of that has meant. So it's much more interesting for me to talk about that than like, oh, let's talk about what's happening with the Boston Celtics right now, which I don't care about at all.
Right. And Paul Shirley, that you're in here with Dr. Richard Olberger. And what? I can't even say this. Okay. So Paul Shirley, you're here with Dr. Richard Olberger, and what you say with Dr. Richard
Remains
stays between you and Dr. Richard
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And your high school friends.
and my high school friends.
It's a little slight clause.
Yes. So yeah, I just had to say that, and that was
Yeah.
maybe our new tagline for the show.
I definitely could have used you in Sioux City. Yeah, I think Sioux Falls, I guess it was actually. Yeah, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I think that's where I remember writing at some point that was rock bottom, was like standing outside of a Holiday Inn in Sioux Falls, and it seemed like the NBA was a million miles away. I was making $700 a week, living in a motel in Yakima, Washington, and we're on the road, and I'm looking up at the marquee at the Indian casino across the street from the hotel, and they've got Def Leppard spelled wrong on the on
And
the marquee.
just on principle, you're like, I'm out
I'm
of
like,
here.
this is it. I don't know if I can do this anymore. But it was, I mean, I think that also speaks to the degree of the ups and downs, right? So that felt like I am so far from where I want to be. And it was only probably 3 weeks later that I got called up for the first time by the Atlanta Hawks and was suddenly reaching the pinnacle of, boyhood dreams. But it's hard to see that when you're in the middle of it, right?
Yeah, that's a really good question right there. I mean, how do you keep yourself when you're like, was it your agent Keith, or like was it calling home? Like, how did you kind of reground yourself in those times?
I think I was lucky to have found writing. So I had started writing when I was in Greece, my first year out of school, and noticed that I was a lot saner when I was writing, and it acted in a cathartic and meditative way to take some of that pressure off. I didn't have a steady girlfriend. I didn't have somebody who'd been through this before. I think I also not suffered necessarily, but like my family has no idea. Like all of this was new all the time. My dad has a PhD in child psychology and worked for the state of Kansas. My mom's a school nurse. Like nobody was ready for even college athletics. Like, we had no idea how that would go. So I spent a lot of time just flailing and figuring out on my own, which was probably helpful in some ways because I didn't have any expectations one way or the other. But there were a lot of weird times where I was fresh out of college, living in my parents' basement, going to a tryout with the Los Angeles Lakers, but then getting cut and coming home and living in my parents' basement again and going up to the old middle school to shoot, telling people like, yeah, I think I want to be a professional basketball player. And they're like, yeah, sure you are, buddy. Like, that's not going to happen. Who are you?
Wow.
So yeah,
did you have the flip side? Did you have some people that were like, keep at it, Paul, or,
yeah, although I think where I'm from in the Midwest, there is I talk all the time about this inferiority complex that Midwesterners have, where I was thankful to all of those people who would always say like, well, now stay grounded, make sure you get that college degree. But it also was limiting to some degree in that you didn't feel like you could go out and do something special or interesting. There was a sense of like, now who do you think you are that you're going to go play in the NBA or do whatever it might be? I remember like vividly I had done really well on all of the tests in high school and actually ended up a National Merit Scholar. That's how I got to go to Iowa State. I was a walk-on technically.
Wow.
And remember the guidance counselor like hammering my mother and me about like, well, now, have you guys looked at vocational technical training? And you're like, well, that would be fine for some people, but like we're talking about like I can go to college for free wherever I want. Like, let's think a little bigger, guys.
Oh, that level of humility, like.
Yeah, so that has always, I think, probably worked in my favor as in making me a decent human being, but also made it a little tricky sometimes to feel like I can do this. There is that voice in the back of your head saying like, now who do you think you are?
But you mentioned something else later on. I think it was one of the tryouts with the Hawks where you showed up and you'd been through it a few times, maybe a few summers and a few trips abroad. And there was a moment, or maybe it was with the Bulls, where you said you went to a tryout and you kind of had this inner instinct like, I feel like I belong here. And you kind of sensed maybe the other guys did not know what they were up against or there was a first time through. So, can you speak a little bit about that transition within yourself where there was this confidence kind of growing?
Yeah, it does. That's another one of those progressions that is difficult to understand when you're in the middle of it, right? So when I was, let's say, 24 and second year out of the NBA, and it still seemed insurmountable a lot of the time, I couldn't have told you what made it possible to transfer to that moment that we're talking about, where I went to this tryout with the Chicago Bulls, and there's 3 other guys there, and I'm probably the guy they want to keep, but they're not telling me that. However, I can sort of sense that, like, the game is moving more slowly for me than it is for them. I can see just in the way that everybody's moving that I'm tracking this better than they are. But that only arrives at that moment, right? There's no way to sense that that's coming because you're in the middle of it. As an observer from the outside, you can sort of see, like, oh, that guy's starting to figure it out. If we were talking about baseball, you'd be like, that pitcher is starting to get it, right? But there's no way to understand how that is even happening, I think, when you're in the middle of it.
Right. And maybe you had to go through a certain amount of trials where things were too fast.
Yeah, it's just a matter of like being thrown into that fire so many times that eventually you kind of understand where the fire's happening and can dodge it maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Any cool questions coming in on Facebook Live, Peter? Or just more Cubs fans?
Yeah, it's funny. Sean Miller, my childhood friend, says, "Go Cubs, Peter." I don't know what this is.
They're the talk of the world right now.
Yes, and it actually says that we have many, many eyeballs, but I can only see the eyeballs that either make a comment or like the Facebook Live. So if you want to get mentioned, you gotta say something or hit that.
Are there
like
any
button.
Indians fans out there? Goodness gracious! Poor Clevelanders.
And it's funny though in that question that talking about Chicago sports.
Yeah, we got back to the Bulls.
Got to the Bulls. I love
back
it.
There. Amazing. It all comes back together.
How long were you in Chicago?
I played for the Bulls as a as a functional member of the team for I think 8 days.
Wow.
And then I had my kidney and spleen blown up by Austin Crozier. which cut short.
He's from California.
Dream.
Are you afraid of? I think he went to.
He went
Crossroads.
to Crossroads. Yeah, I've played in that high school gym of his. I even tweeted at him one time because he was, I think, now a commentator for or maybe still is, for the Pacers. I was like, "Hey, man, do you know that you almost ended my life at some point?" He didn't respond.
Oh, I guess he would be up for a one-on-one challenge.
No, he'd probably take me. Yeah, it's funny talking, like, as I discuss these various stops, there's almost always like some kind of bizarre ending to each of them. So yeah, I was on the Bulls for a third of the season, but I was only in uniform for 5 games or something like that because of that wound.
Yeah, that really like grasped me, that part of the book where, like, here you are, and it feels like, I don't know if it's in retrospect or the moment, but it's like, and I've been that big man on the court. I'm coming over to play help defense. I'm not giving up a free layup.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure in the NBA it's a lot more force of his knee.
Right.
And you're finally trying to show, like, this is my time on the court and I want to earn more minutes or more playing time. And then there's this injury.
Yeah, it was like it was a big time injury. So my spleen was lacerated and my kidney was fractured, is how you actually diagnose.
Yeah, and you write about it in jest, but that experience
Graphic
on the
detail,
plane.
yeah.
But that's kind of terrifying, right?
Yeah, it's gross. And when I talk, one of the speeches I give is about adaptability, about like learning how to adapt to things. And one of the things I talk about is that I think I was given sort of this karmic message that I was doing things the wrong way, and that was my punishment in a lot of ways, because I think I was trying to live up to what the Bulls wanted me to be, which was the hard-playing white kid who will sacrifice his body. When I probably should have just been like, we're down by 30. Austin Crozier can have that layup. Like, I've played 19 straight minutes to send a message to Tyson Chandler that he's lazy. That's sufficient. I don't need to go throw my body in front of this train. And that summer, actually, I'd been in this mentality of like, I got to do everything right for the Bulls, and I got to get this contract. This is going to be the thing that gives me the Austin Crozier like contract. He at the time was on like a $42 million deal, basically from playing hard in the playoffs a few years before.
First my Knicks, I believe.
Yeah, I think you might be right. And then that summer I was in the ICU for 9 days, and when I got out, I had this giant pocket of blood in my retroperitoneal cavity. Couldn't run or even really stand up for quite a while. So I went to a gym close to my house in Kansas City, not the one you've been to, but one near there, with a guy named Scott Wedman, who was a player for the Boston Celtics, who had been my coach in the minor leagues, and he just re-taught me not only how to shoot, but also how to think about the game. That's also when I started like meditating and doing more visualization, and actually started to change how I thought about basketball, and was so much more successful after that because I got back to doing it out of sort of joyful reasons.
Yeah,
like
your voice sounded a lot more
because-
happy about it.
Yeah, I did it because it felt freer. I did it because of the reasons that I had started playing basketball, which were, I'm good at this thing and I enjoy getting better at it. I'm not worried about what this means to other people, as hokey as that may sound, but because of that, I made the Phoenix Suns opening day roster the next year, the Phoenix Suns of Steve Nash and Amari Stoudemire, and then got to play half the year with the best team in the NBA. And it's probably somewhat simplistic to link those up too much, but it makes a lot of sense in my mind. The way that I was thinking about basketball was so closed off and tight when I rolled over to take that charge off of Austin Crozier. The way I played that following year was so much looser and freer and again, joyous. And I think I got to write a book because of that. I think I let go of some of the concerns I had for like, well, what do people think about me? Like, what am I, who am I in their eyes? And just, I became the guy who like, oh, if you ask Paul Shirley a question, he'll say something at least truthful and sometimes funny, as opposed to the rest of these assholes who are just going to tell you what you want to hear.
And I actually want to get a little bit more into the psychology of your switch up there. And but first, there is a follow-up question here from Sean Miller.
Mm-hmm.
Who got the foul on that play?
I fouled him too. I got hurt.
No. Insult to injury.
And I fouled him.
Okay, and we just got the word that the Bears beat the Vikings.
Okay,
So,
good. Let's bring this back.
Yeah.
Let's bring it back to Chicago every few minutes.
Get back to the topic.
But I do.
Is this
We
to
are going to
reinforce the Midwestern?
The Midwestern
we are going
bias.
to get into our Richard Listens list of 3 that we do every week here on Richard Listens. This week on the Richard Listens list of 3, it's going to revolve around Mr. Paul Shirley, and I kind of want to use it as a segue to get into more eventually of the psychology of what you were just speaking of. And obviously we still have a lot to talk about with
Peter, I do have to tell you that I owe it to my high school friends to ask Paul one question about. We did uncover in his book, that while in Greece, was it Greece or correct me? No, Spain, that he was competing indeed with one Zendon Hamilton.
That is true.
Who luckily I did not have to lacerate a spleen, but I took a charge from Zendon while trying to dunk, and that may be the beginning of some of my back issues. But he did not complete the dunk. I will say that.
Okay,
wow, way to go.
So while I have this moment with Paul here in studio, and for all our Rockville Center, New York fans to balance out the coasts on this radio show.
Where's Zendon Hamilton from originally?
He played at a school called Sewanaka,
Okay.
which largely it felt like meant they recruited for the best players from Queens and somehow brought them in the district. But he played at Sewanaka, and that year, I think the 1 year that we were there together, you know, they were, you know, the powerhouse and the Phi Slamma Jamma kind of style. And we did have them down 10-1 at the end of the first quarter by playing a 4 quarters spread. Yes.
Smart. Zendon Hamilton was when I told you every story about me has an injury involved. When I was playing in Spain, I had been there like 12 days and then blew out the brachial plexus nerve on the right side of my body, which like connects to pec, shoulder, everything on the right side of your body. And so they brought Zendon Hamilton in to be my replacement because they didn't know how long I was going to be out. And it sounds a little self-aggrandizing, but my coach disliked Zendon Hamilton so much that even though I had no musculature on the right side of my body, I came back to play after 2 months because he's like, he can't catch the ball. Like, you have to play instead of him.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was a point of pride because Zendon Hamilton was much more well known than I was.
Yeah.
He had the weirdest like Tyrannosaurus arms. Like he would just play like this all the time.
Yeah.
I don't understand it.
So there was never a dunk on Zendon or a time when you met him and said, "Look, Zendon, this is my spot," in Spanish or something like that?
No, it was more like, "Look at this jump shot from 17 feet, Zendon."
And now we have a new feature here on Richard Listens, 6 Degrees of Zendon Hamilton.
Yes.
I can't believe you both have competed with and against Zendon Hamilton.
I mean, that just made this meeting that much more serendipitous, and it was great because the players, who are the younger players who were on the team next year, like came in the game specifically to get a technical foul the next year versus Zendon because he would not take my hand after I fouled him on the foul line. Wow. So it's ominous. It's ominous. There was some disrespect there. So I was hoping Paul Shirley got some redemption.
Yeah,
I
did.
did.
It sounds like his karma came back.
Yeah.
It's the small things.
Subtle karma by way of that coach wanted me more than him.
So we
Peter,
go from
continue.
6 Degrees of Zendon Hamilton to Richard Listens' list of 3. So our list of 3 revolves around you, Mr. Paul Shirley. Number 1 on the Richard Listens list of 3, we like to talk about sports psychology, and we talk a lot about what athletes do after their athletic career is over. And in your experiences in professional basketball in the United States and Europe, you don't have to name names if you don't want to, but who is the one person that you felt was most prepared for retirement? Like maybe a teammate or something that, really had his shit together, either through, degrees, business, money. I don't know, but someone you identified as like, this guy's going to do good when he retires.
So I'm
Besides yourself, of course.
I'm fairly close with Matt Bonner, who played for the San Antonio Spurs. We're not like bosom buddies or anything.
Florida Gator, right?
But we've gotten to know each other a little bit. And he, I think, is just done playing now. Like he played last year, may have been his last year with the Spurs. And he's one of those guys that you can tell, like, oh, he'll be fine. right? Like there's, as you know about life, it is interesting when you can see that other people are going to be fine, and then you also think like, what do they think about me? But he seems like the sort of guy who will just be okay, right?
What gave you that sense?
I think generally curiosity about the world outside of basketball is probably the biggest indicator of that. Whether you have been able to conceive of that world. So some guys can't even imagine that that's going to be a thing, and that usually comes back to haunt them.
Very interesting.
Like I would imagine Kobe Bryant being the least prepared for life after basketball.
Yeah.
Although there's some, when you're sitting on that pile of cash, I guess
Right.
it's easy to start a production company and
Mm-hmm.
record label and
Right.
all that kind of fun stuff. So next on the Richard Listens list of 3, number 2.
Can I ask a quick
follow-up?
question? Yeah. So how much of like loving team and looking at the Spurs and seeing this product,
Mhm.
also I believe he was at Florida under Billy Donovan.
Mm-hmm.
How much of do you think this preparation for after sports comes from the coach and the systems you play within in terms of that preparation for who you'll become?
It's got to help. A couple of years ago, Matt was in town, and I had breakfast with him and Manu Ginobili and Tiago Splitter, and I was struck by just how different the conversations they were having were than conversations I had most of the time on teams I was in. So I can imagine Popovich and that whole crowd just sort of creating a different attitude around the team. I remember being in San Antonio for a week-long tryout at some point, and PJ Carlesimo was an assistant at the time, and even he just seemed more evolved than most assistant coaches in the NBA.
And you talked about that vibe being really different depending on the city and the team culture.
Totally. And I think the best coaches are on that level of cerebral attitude. I would bet. I don't know Steve Kerr all that well, but I know Ron Adams, who's an assistant for the Warriors, and he's another guy who's learned and worldly. And I think that ability to see the bigger picture can only help you as a coach. Right, Joe Madden?
Yes. Not to bring it back to Chicago sports, but
You were supposed to answer in character.
yeah, Joe Madden.
But I do think that the very best coaches are people who are worldly and have perspective on how maybe this doesn't mean everything. It's those like mid to good coaches who are just grinders who only know one thing. Like I can imagine. I don't think Tom Thibodeau, or however we're supposed to say it, I'd bet he doesn't read the Wall Street Journal. No offense to Tom Thibodeau. He's just so devoted to basketball that's what he does. And that probably makes him really good, but will never make him great. Does that, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Defensive grinder.
Right.
That's probably stopping practice every time you don't help side double team.
Right. And thinking about it for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
Whereas I think Greg Popovich lets it go and just like, well, sun's gonna come up again tomorrow.
Which sounds like Joe Madden. All right. So number 2 on the Richard Listens list of 3. Conversely, is there a player, and you don't have to name a name if you don't want to, but is there a player that, you said, my God, besides Kobe Bryant, this guy is not going to make it when he retires?
All of the rest of them.
Wow.
I think it is pretty. I mean, I think I was probably as well set up as anyone to move on after basketball. I have a degree in mechanical engineering. As I mentioned, my parents never focused on the sports thing. It wasn't like we all played a lot of sports, but it wasn't like this is the only thing you'll ever be worthwhile at. And I still struggled. Like I spent 2 years in therapy trying to figure out like what my life was going to be like after basketball. So if I'm on this end of the spectrum, I think as far as preparation, I was certainly not on this end of the spectrum as far as talent, but I think everybody else was over here as far as even thinking about how, so even though they've heard the stories and they've seen the cautionary tales, it's just really difficult when you're in the middle of it to consider that it's ever going to be over.
That's interesting. So you said you spent 2 years in sports psychology figuring
it
out.
wasn't even sports psychology. It was just regular psychologist, like just trying to put together like what is my identity without this thing that I've attached my identity to. And I think that's, especially amongst men, it's such a like weird macho thing too, where you're attaching so much of your self-worth to this vocation, and now it's gone. But you're also young, which is confusing. So you're decrepit, but you're still only in your mid-30s, right. Which is a weird mind space to occupy.
So, not to skip, we'll still get to number 3 on the list, but this does lend to some follow-up questions, and I'm sure Richard has a couple, but one more that I would have is that being that you're the motivational speaker, author, you have this great writing group, and I do want to, we've only got like 15 minutes left of the show, and I want to get to those things, but then at what point after retirement did you start doing these things? Were they epiphanies? Were you planning them as you went? Did you discover them through the psychology sessions?
So I'd had the book published when I was in the middle of my career, and so the next step when I got out, I thought was I need to write the next book. So I spent like 3 years working on this novel that ended up being a failure. And because of that, had sort of the dark night of the soul, where I realized, like, A, I wasn't working hard enough at writing, and B, the thing I value most about writing is creating connection. And so was able to, thanks to a friend who kind of suggested this idea, create this writer's workshop that happens in Santa Monica, which is a pretty modest thing. It's not like we're taking over the world by any means, but it allows me, I think, this sense that, like, I'm giving people a place where they can work, where they can meet other people. And that, as you know, with everything, right, it's a slow progression. That thing started where it was 1 night a week and donations only, and now it's 2 nights a week and it costs, and we have monthly fees and mugs. But these things never get generated just out of the blue, right? They always happen because, like, well, let's try this and we'll see if that works, and that's okay, it's working, so let's try it a little harder. So yeah, none of these have been generated by my own brilliant ideas. It's always been like, well, let's see if this works, and then maybe I'm working on a book right now that a nonfiction memoir called Stories I Tell on Dates, and it started as like, I just have all these stories, I should write them down. And then I thought, like, oh, you know what, I tell all these stories on dates all the time, that's what I should call the book, that's how I should organize these, right? But it didn't start as that. It wasn't like I'm smart enough to have thought of that at the beginning. It just came about over the course of several years.
Interesting. And I do love the sound of your writing group, and in all sincerity, I think that I'm going to check it out because, I've written many screenplays in my day, but now I'm like, for some reason I've been stuck for a couple of years now, and something like your writing group sounds great. And for anyone out there that's interested in it, what can you give us the details? Writer's Block LA.
Yeah, it's called Writer's Block with just a K because I'm super creative. And it's writersblockla.com if you ever want to check out the website. But I do think, like, it's important for me to find satisfaction in the daily practice of writing. And I think we are deceived all the time by this idea of, like, well, if I wrote a bestseller or a blockbuster movie, then I would be happy. Well, that's stupid. I mean, it's not stupid. It's totally forgivable. We're all kind of trained to think that way. But in truth, what makes you happy as a writer is just sitting and writing and going through that process every day, just like is the case with yoga or meditation or even shooting free throws, Like, it's not really about becoming the best free throw shooter. It's about I was outside and I felt this connection with whatever, the world or the earth or the basket. And then along the way, I got to be a better basketball player. And I think writing is very similar to that.
Richard.
Yes, Joe.
As a sports psychologist, what kind of follow-up would you give Paul for what he's been talking about?
Well, I was just thinking, like my kids keep asking me between my best friend and I, who was better? And I was like, that question is what I told them is what led us to get out there in the snow, in the driveway and play until, you couldn't see anymore. And then you picked it up again the next day. And it was like the process. There was no answer.
Yeah, there's no answer. Yeah. It is very much like that, that episode of House of Cards, and it's more mystical than I'm going to be able to put together. But I think it's in Buddhist tradition, the monks who will create the sand sculpture,
right,
and then they blow it away at the end, right? It's kind of an over-the-top example, but that is kind of how everything we're talking about works, right? Like, you're never going to actually become the basketball player or the writer that you want to become, but you hope to approach that in an asymptotic way, I guess. Like you get as close as you can to it.
So that's a good question. So you did mention, so here there's these moments when, you're donation only and it's only one night a week. Did you hit a low point with that as well? Did you notice a certain, patterns in your own process that were that had some parallels between basketball and writing?
Yeah, I keep doing it. Like I this talk that I've been working on, I tell 3 separate stories. One is where this happened in basketball, one's where it happened in writing, and one's where it happened in speaking, where each time I start thinking like, well, this is going to be the thing that puts me over the edge. This will be the thing that makes me money or gets me famous or whatever it is. And then I'll have some semi-disastrous occurrence, and I'm like, oh boy, you did it to yourself again. You started thinking about the outside rewards instead of just trying to do this thing well and from a happy or joyful place, and understanding that if you do that, then people will want you to do it for them. They will pay you to do it because you're doing it for the proverbial right reasons.
When you said earlier that, a lot of people are writing like because they think they're going to write the best-selling novel or the blockbuster screenplay, and that's for the wrong reasons. Like, you kind of hit on a little bit, but what are the right reasons to be creative or to pursue an endeavor?
Well, I mean, I don't know that I know that answer
well,
exactly.
Well, your opinion on it.
I think what I've learned is that when you start thinking of it based on external rewards, you usually get screwed up. Like things usually go awry. If you can connect to a kind of intrinsic value system of this is why I get excited about doing this activity. So for me with basketball, if I truly cut to the core of it, I liked going onto the court and feeling like He-Man, like getting to change from Prince Adam into this semi-all-powerful being, right? I loved that feeling. I loved the daily improvement. I loved the fact that I could go into a basketball gym and by the end of the day do something that I couldn't do at the beginning. And it didn't really matter like whether I had won or lost or whatever, but just that feeling of like being in your body and moving in an effective way gave me a little high, gave me a little boost. And when I was attaching to those things, other people I think recognized that like joy and the way that I played and wanted me to come play at their college or wanted me to pay me to play. But then when I started thinking about the repercussions of that, when I started thinking like, well, I'll get famous because of this, or I'll make money. I almost got Gollum-like and like, sort of hold on to it. And I think I do the same thing with writing sometimes.
Paul, I just got to share that there's a moment in the book where you're talking about, I don't know, the Bulls in dissension or something, and you're put on the practice court. And there's a moment where you're like, we're going to win every single game in these practice scrimmages. And just the joy within that, like, right. Yeah, I don't care if we're 33 and 50 right now, and that excitement of like, right, you don't know if that coaches are really noticing it. You hope they are,
right? But you're really just existing. Like I'm not way into, but I meditate every day, and I like certain yogic practices as well, and there is something to that. The idea of just being so in the moment that you're not thinking about what's after this or before this or what the repercussions of it are. And I think in basketball and in sports in general, especially as a child, you can reach that without even knowing you're reaching it. And that as adults, we're often trying to get back to that. You know what I mean? Like you as a 17-year-old, I didn't know that I was in the moment. I just was. You're just right. You aren't thinking like, well, what is this feeling? How do I feel? You're just, I'm on the court and I feel amazing because I'm so right here and I'm not worried about what's happening after the game or what my parents said or what that girl thought about me. I just care about playing well right now.
But the parallels of giving that story where here you are in Chicago, relegated, you know in your role, you're on the bench and you're fighting every day, and yet to everybody else reading that story, it's right. How do you put your head down and still commit and still work hard and still find those moments that are yours?
Right. Well, I think that's what's tricky too, because as you move up the ladder, there are more and more people telling you to value different things, right? So the more people get in your ear, and it's not like I had some huge posse or something. It's just that the world is kind of telling you to look at it differently And I think you see it with musicians a lot of the time. I compare basketball players to musicians a lot because I think weirdly our brains are kind of set up the same way. Where musicians just did it because they loved it and they connected to the singing. And I think that's what we love when we go see a great concert is hopefully we like the music, but we're also connecting to the idea that these people are so passionate about this and we would just want kind of a piece of that. And I think that's true in basketball too. And the same thing happens with musicians, right? They start attaching the external rewards to it, and so then they make the bad sophomore album that is bloated and nobody cares about.
Right.
Yeah.
So, all of that being said, we'll finally get to Richard Liston's list of 3, number 3. And that is, what is one of your favorite stories of your travels and travails in professional basketball?
Well, I wrote 330 pages worth.
Right.
No.
And actually, that being said, Richard, you read the entire book. I didn't get to the book. I do apologize, Paul Shirley, but I look forward to buying it and reading it. But that being said, where can people find your book? I'm sure Amazon and
it's
all the usual
Amazon
places.
and the usual places. You can be one of the, I can see, I don't know why I checked this. I think because they made it easy in the last couple of years, but the Random House author portal tells me how many books were sold each week. So I can always go in and find 5 people bought my book this week. Favorite story. I don't know. The one that comes to mind, maybe it's because we're in LA and maybe it's because we're talking about the psychology of things. When I graduated from college, I was pretty burnt out, was fairly done with basketball. My senior year, I remember calling my mother in the midst of my college team being a top 10 team and me being a pretty important part of that team, saying I don't know if I'm going to make it to the end of this year, and I'm definitely done playing basketball when this season's over because I had a fairly miserable human being as a coach, and it had just worn me down.
Wow.
So when I went off to the Portsmouth Invitational Tournament, which is where also-rans who are not going to be first-round picks but maybe would get picked in the second round and are maybe going to get to play overseas, all go and collect one another. I made this pact with myself, which was that basically if this isn't fun, I'm not going to do it anymore. So I got back to sort of these principles that we're talking about of I'm going to do this because it's fun, and if I'm not having fun, I'm not going to do it anymore. So that went pretty well, and I signed with an agent, and then that summer, I got invited to Summer League with the Cleveland Cavaliers, and that went pretty well, and so I got invited to training camp with the LA Lakers. This was the Lakers of Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant, 2001.
Wow.
Phil Jackson's the coach, Brian Shaw's there, Rick Fox is there. It's the whole kit and caboodle, right?
Horace Grant.
Horace Grant may have been gone. I don't know.
John Sally.
It was after John Sally.
Oh.
We've got
Derek Fisher.
Slava Medvedenko, Derek Fisher, Joe Crispin. So first day, we're going to go off to Hawaii for training camp, right? And my first day there is media day. I've arrived. They've picked me up at the airport in a limousine, and it's a crazy feeling because the limo driver has no idea that I'm invited to training camp to try to make one of the 1 or 2 open spots. There's 6 or 7 of us trying to compete for these spots, including Dickie Simpkins of Chicago Bulls fame.
Right.
To bring it back to the Bulls.
Bringing it back.
So he's like, well, this is a free agent signing, which is how you are labeled, even though I had almost no chance of making the team, but still I'm in training camp with the Los Angeles Lakers. So whatever, I get to go through my physical, and then I go off to media day at wherever it was, their practice facility down in El Segundo, and we're in the locker room, and it's me and Shaq and Kobe Bryant and Phil Jackson and all these people, right? And I'm this scared rookie from Iowa State, and I remember having this moment where I was like, no, you're going to hold strong to your principles. You're not going to act like the scared rookie from Iowa State. And so I walked up to Shaquille O'Neal and just stuck out my hand and said, hey, I'm Paul Shirley. And Shaquille O'Neal said, I know who you are. And I don't think he actually knew who I was, but he, being Shaquille O'Neal, this very gregarious and magnanimous human being, made me feel comfortable. And it was a great lesson in if I acted like I belonged, if I behaved with joy and connection to what I cared about, which was just being a nice guy, decent things happened. Until 3 weeks later, and they cut me. But for a little while, it was okay.
Did you get to meet Mr. Buss?
I don't remember. There's a lot of names. The Lakers gave me the title to my book because when I got cut, I went down to the equipment room and said, hey, so can I take my, I'm sure I didn't say, can I keep my jersey, but can I take my jersey? Because, like, I'm cut now. And he said, no, we're not a club that does that.
Wow.
Yeah, that was like, wow, what an
Why?
experience, huh? That really.
What are you going to do with that jersey? You burn them? Is that what goes on?
But secretly, that was every time you left the team and got to keep your stuff. You must.
Yeah, I was, and because every place else was like, of course you can. What else would we do this? So but I was burned. So every time I would go like, are you sure I can keep? Okay, thanks.
Didn't you try to create some sort of distraction and snag it while he wasn't looking?
Well, I went as I think I wrote this in the book. To get my revenge, because I was a rookie, my locker was in an equipment room. So not the equipment room where the jerseys are, but an auxiliary one. So I stole 2 pairs of shoes to get to get back at them.
Jarvis, was that a 5 minutes or a 5 second? Oh, okay. Because I thought we were just about out of time, but we are not.
So you were out of gas.
Yeah, I was just like about to be like.
So maybe we can get one Russia story.
Good
in
golly.
Here. I don't know.
Yeah, what's that about, Richard?
Well, yeah, just is it? How do you say the name? Is it Kazan?
Kazan, yeah.
Kazan,
Mm-hmm.
yes. So Paul's journey, and that was just so interesting to me how you wound up playing in Russia, and the experience of being on a mattress, cold, totally crazy traffic rules, no language, and some interesting habits at their Christmas party.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't know what we can share on the air.
Right. Everything about Russia was bizarre and surreal. I think what was most surprising to me was just that I had expected to love it because I had heard about guys going to play in Russia. It was at the time and still is one of the better and high-paying leagues in Europe. So I thought, this would be so cool to get to go play in Russia. And it was not as cool as I thought it was going to be, which I had an inkling as soon as I got to JFK and had to go to the Aeroflot desk, and just the sense around the Aeroflot desk. They were supposed to have a paper ticket waiting for me and they couldn't find it. And I remember just based on what was going on, I was like, this would be okay if they don't have this ticket and I can just go home. I don't think I want to do this. And sure enough, it was weird the whole time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just culture clash, weird?
I think I was scared most of the time, probably because of being raised in the 80s and feeling like the Russian language was terrifying. And it sounds so stupid, right? Oh, suck it up, idiot. But the fact that everybody was so unfriendly all the time, which is, I think, a part of Russian culture is not that they're unfriendly. It's just that they look unfriendly. That's just their bearing. But I couldn't deal with that. I just couldn't process
Cultural
it.
differences, yeah.
And also, I got there and the team was not particularly welcoming. And as you know, basketball culture and sports culture is so much about being able to fit in and figure out where you belong in a group, which is true in any kind of workspace or work environment. I think if you can't figure out how do you fit in with these people, it's unsettling. And it's always hard in sports because you have to do that very quickly and you have to do it at a high level of intensity. And this is going to sound weird, but you have to do it with very few clothes on. I think that people forget about you're in a locker immediately changing around these strangers, putting on clothes that are there's not a lot of them. And now you're kind of exposed and you're trying your hardest amongst other people. And to be really good, you need to feel like you can be kind of emotionally vulnerable in that space. And for whatever reason, that team, it didn't help that it was just a bunch of weirdos who didn't necessarily, it wasn't a good team. It wasn't well set up. It was a good basketball team, but it wasn't a particularly highly functional team. Yeah. And so a lot of it had to do with the basketball being strange. And then that was exacerbated by me being in Kazan, Russia, of all places.
Right. Well, now we really are wrapping it up, Mr. Paul Shirley. And you've really given a lot of great nuggets of wisdom, even up till the very end here, in talking about, having to assimilate with a group of strangers quickly in a sports setting and stuff. But there's been many other nuggets of wisdom you've given, so we won't go over them again.
Well, last thing I want to add is that Paul shares right there where he turns down a sum of money to choose his passion, where to follow his instinct. So that's something I really took from the book, and I hope people will read it. That's not an easy choice to do, and that's something
Yeah, and I think it worked out. I think that turning down that money is what led to me getting, again, I had connected again to like, this is what I care about. I care about maybe getting to the NBA, and got to write a book because of it.
That's amazing. And I know it's not like you'll be getting a windfall of job offers from this, but if people want to reach you, Paul, how can they do that?
I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Paul Then Shirley. Then, because I hate being called by my last name, so I would like to remind people that the Paul goes first.
I was wondering why that was your handle. I like that.
It's also regular Paul Shirley was taken. My email address business is mysocalledcareer@gmail.com if you'd like to reach out with a question.
Awesome. Well, Paul, thank you so much for being the guest on Richard Listens this week.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to be able to talk about the mind a little bit.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And
go Cubs.
Go Cubs. And Richard, we will be back in 2 weeks on Monday, November 14th. And
happy Halloween.
You can always reach Dr. Richard Olberger at facebook.com, Richard Listens, and Twitter and Instagram at Richard Listens. And we will look forward to seeing everyone in 2 weeks. Good night.
Good night.